Hi everyone, my name is Spencer White. Today I'll be presenting my presentation, which I'm calling Global Attitudes Toward English. The article that I was assigned to present is by Richard Bailey, and it's called Attitudes Towards English, The Future of English in South Asia. So before I kind of dive in directly to the article, let me just speak and give a little bit of information about the author. So Richard Bailey's dates are 1939, 2011. He's notable in the academy. He's an American linguistic and a scholar of English at large. Most notably, he was a English professor at the renowned University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Um, he had tenure there for many years and had many contributions to the field as a whole. And in general, these contributions and his work in general looked at the ideas of English as a world language, as a global universal language. So that's where a lot of his work was. And indeed, this specific article that I'm presenting is actually from a larger book on the same subject. So my presentation is on this article, and it is about the future of English in South Asia. And so before I kind of dive directly into it, I'll give some broader context about the article itself. So the essay that is written is about 13 pages long, and it's very brief, and hopefully you all get the chance to read it. But it is a part, like I said, of a larger book, which was titled South Asian English Structure, Use, and Users, which was published by MIT Press in 1996. So this is on that broader topic previously published. The article as a whole discusses English as a product of imposed colonialism. That's kind of the way that it's framed, and it kind of talks about these deeper, broader implications of English speaking in South Asia. So he surveys a lot of different areas in South Asia and kind of speaks about these broader implications of what does it mean, of course, to speak English in these areas. So it's very interesting. The article, this specific essay has been cited a lot in contributions in the field in linguistics. I did like a quick literature search on this, and I was like blown away at how many different kinds of sort of the citations that this had in the academy and how many different presentations cite this as a leading role. So I do hope that you get the chance to take a look at this in your own research. But with all that being said, let me just go ahead and dive straight into the article itself. So at first, he kind of frames this discussion through surveying literary works, and in doing so, he looks at different authors from around the world, and he looks at their works that they've written as authors. So there's poets that he talks about. There's like a children's author actually, and different stories and essays, and he looks at how they speak about the English language and what that might reveal about their own attitudes and really the attitudes of their cultures and the people who are reading these literary works. So he looks at literature from all over. So he looks at Caribbean, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, not just South Africa, South Asia, but widely South Asian cultures. These authors all sort of have a theme that he cites, and it's really interesting, and you should read all of these little citations that he has. But in general, they kind of speak of this injustice that they see when their native language in their communities die out because of English language use. So it's common that they express this through words like losing their tongue, their native tongue, and it's a deeply personal thing, and widely like losing a part of their identity in the way that they speak about it. Something that I found interesting too, which is worth noting, a lot of the language that's used to speak about this process of losing their native language to English, they'll use language and words like military and soldier. And this is, of course, to draw associations with this militaristic view of Western colonial powers, which is as Bailey says, widely the view of these cultures and really the view of English use as a whole. Bailey notes that the theme of all these pieces of literature is that English is one of the crimes and contradictions of the English educated elite. So next, after he kind of talks about literature and what that might mean and how that might reveal something about attitudes towards English, he shifts his gaze to the use of English in South Asian education. And so in doing so, he says that the best way to do this and to look at education, he looks at the views of university teachers of English teachers at universities in South Asia. So he says that the views of English university teachers seems to be, to me, to be a good index of the present state of future development of English in South Asia. So he highlights differing views of modern day English use in different countries. So he writes all sections of each country and he kind of does a little survey, but I've highlighted and summarized kind of all of these countries just to give you kind of a quick overview. So in India, he notes that using English is socially kind of negatively viewed, and it's, he says, laughable. It wouldn't be like maybe a good thing to use English socially, but it's not necessarily declining in use. So it's maybe just as popular as it once was, despite popular Indian myths that say that it's declining in use. In Nepal, it's very notable that English is only available to those with very large, significant amounts of resources, which is generally true in many countries, but especially in Nepal, he notes. And he says that the majority of English has only a symbolic role. So it's like an economic status to be fluent in English and to have had educational opportunities to learn English language. In Pakistan, he notes that proficiency in English is declining and its educational uses may be said to be shrinking for various reasons, and very similar to Nepal as well in terms of the access of English education. And then in Sri Lanka, he notes that English medium schools no longer exist. So they once were, especially in colonial times. That was the big thing, was that English was taught in school and it was compulsory. But in modern day, it still exists, the language, in some professional sectors, but English medium schools no longer exist at the lower level. And so kind of in concluding, after providing this literary highlights and then this survey of education English use, he kind of generally says that South Asian cultures widely accept that English is, to some degree at least, a universal language, especially in sectors like science, technology, development, diplomacy, politics, international relations, and all of these high-paying sectors. So English is used in these cultures, but only for these kind of elite type jobs and only for those, of course, like with the resources. But despite this, across all cultures, English is proportionally diminishing in use. So despite these high-paying jobs, maybe speaking in English, in general, it's diminishing in use. We don't have these powers forcing English in schools and forcing it across the whole, populations as a whole. So in that sense, it is changing and it's diminishing in general. And then I wanted to just end with this quote, which summarizes the article perfectly, which says that English is becoming the language of the powerful few at the expense of the powerless many. So that's sort of the article, and summarizing all of it, I guess I can provide a little bit of personal reflection on my experience reading this and maybe generally on these topics that are discussed in this article. So I guess first I will just say that in the past year, I've taught English as a second language, most notably in Guatemala with CSU. I was a part of the service learning program in the spring. And then since then, I've also developed a great interest in the activity as a whole. But in doing so, I've thought a lot about the ethical dilemmas that are associated with the activity. So I've thought, what does it mean for me as a relatively privileged white man from the United States to go into another developing country and teach my own native tongue? What does that mean? And is it ethical? And what makes it ethical? So um, it's probably not surprising upon hearing me, say that this is something that I think about a lot, to know that this topic of this was of great interest to me. And I'm glad that it's something that's being talked about and is increasingly being talked about more and more. But I think it's something that we all have to think about, maybe, especially those of us that are interested in teaching English. What is it? How is it ethical to teach English as a second language, and what are these implications? What does it mean for us to be going to others, right, and teaching English? So that's something that I think a lot about, and I hope that you also think a lot about it and get to reflect as well. So with that being said, here are my two discussion questions that I have based on my own presentation and on the article itself. So my first question is, like I just said, I'm curious to hear from all of you, in what ways, if there's any ways at all, is it ethical to teach English in countries that have been historically the victim to English speaking Western colonial powers? So what makes it ethical, if at all? So there's kind of a bombshell of a question for you to answer. And then my second question is, as global poverty generally declines, is there any less of a need for a global universal language? So is it any less needed now that there's a universal language, as kind of other countries start to rise out of poverty, and we kind of become more globalized as a society? So those are my two questions. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. I hope that you found my presentation engaging, and I look forward to seeing your posts in the discussion. Thank you so much. Bye.